My father's suicide, probably the defining moment of my life, because his mother killed herself. Her father killed himself. Kind of felt like Forrest Gump on the battlefield, right? His destiny to die in battle, and my destiny to maybe be a third or fourth generation of suicide. And it ends with me. I said this at my father's funeral 20 years ago. It fucking stops here. There will not be a suicide number 3. That is my life purpose, is not to kill myself.
Hi, I'm Steve Sapourn, and this is The Narrow's Journey. I created this show for the man who's ready to see his actions align with who he really is. Join me each week for conversations, practical tools, and real stories to help you take ownership of your mind, your habits, and your life. I'm very happy to have Dr. Baruch Halevi here today. And what's interesting about your story, I love stories of people that take the real difficulties in their life and make them into something meaningful and purpose and service. And your story is definitely that. So I'm excited to get through that thing. You were a rabbi for 20 years. Now you work with men, in a variety of formats. Logotherapy practitioner. You have a nonprofit for men's suicide, and you've just written a book. This book here, The Guy and the Glass. So you're a busy cat, and I'm really thankful to have you on. Thanks for the time.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a fan of your podcast, and I get to be on it, so it's an honor.
Yay.
Yeah.
So your father took his life, right?
Okay.
And that's an incredible tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And that set you on a path from being the rabbi to now your book. And I just want to get, before we get into the details of your work and what you do and how you got to this spot.
I love it, man. I teach the Enneagram. I think maybe you mentioned that, but it's Enneagram 8 Challenger. Like, I don't like foreplay either. Let's go. All right, here we go, the deep end.
Yeah.
My father's suicide, probably the defining moment of my life, partially because his mother killed herself, and legend has it, her father killed himself. Kind of felt like Forrest Gump on the battlefield, right? His destiny to die in battle, and my destiny to maybe be a third or fourth generation of suicide. And I knew at that moment in time that I had choices to make if I was going to change my family's and my family's trajectory, and made some real important choices, I think, that hinged on my father's tragic choices.
How old were you when it happened?
I was older. So my grandmother was... I was 15 when my grandmother killed herself, and I can talk more about that. And then my father was in his 40s, and then when he killed himself, he was 60, and I was in my early 30s. So, I was a grown man, wife, 2 kids, 2 more following shortly after. But yeah, in my early 30s.
And what was going on in your life then? Were you a rabbi at that point?
I had become a rabbi probably 10 years prior to that. Mm-hmm. I think in many ways in reaction to my father, suicide is never just a thing out of thin air. There's always a backstory that would lead to that. And his backstory was he was a very successful man by outward definitions. Everything, the people you and I know want in life, the white picket fence, the wife, the whole 9 yards. Mm-hmm. But he started to throw it away after his mother killed herself. That was his midlife crisis, ultimately, that he never recovered from. And so I watched my father really descend down this slippery slope into hell, throwing away his life. And I think I formed my adult life around that in reaction. I wanted to go the opposite direction. I wanted to be buttoned up and, grounded and responsible. And so I think in many ways I became a rabbi in reaction to that, and it served a purpose, and I don't regret it, but anything in reaction is probably not the best for us or certainly sustainable. And so there came a point when I realized, I'm just doing this in reaction to my father's bad choices. And when he came undone and ultimately killed himself, set in motion for me a lot of choices that I had to make.
Interesting. And so was there, I get the reaction part, but was there something about the institutionalism of religion as being a rabbi that didn't fit at some point? Or was it more just that was a chapter and it's over?
No, the long story is I grew up in a typical American secular Jewish home. I grew up in Nebraska, first of all, as a Jew in Nebraska. It's like I wasn't a dime a dozen.
Yeah.
All my friends were and still from Nebraska still are evangelical. So I grew up in an interesting scenario where I was the Jew. I was always reminded I was a Jew, even when I didn't identify much as a Jew. It was culturally who I was. It wasn't religiously or spiritually for sure. And so when I became, late teen, early 20s, I was hungry for spirituality. I was hungry for something nourishing, and I went off into the world, and I found it in Buddhism and Hinduism and everybody else's ism except Judaism. And eventually I found my way to Israel. I started studying Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, and I realized, you know what? I want to know what's here. I want more. And I found a lot of comfort in it. I found a lot of direction for a period of time. It really helped orient me in a home life that was falling apart with my father, my parents' marriage, lots of other things. And so it served a purpose, and it really became an anchor point for me over the next 20 years or so. So I don't regret it. I still identify as a Jew from a cultural perspective, even a religious perspective, but it's not a spiritual practice for me anymore. And when I got to that point, I'm a rabbi. I didn't want to live a life out of integrity. I didn't want to be up there preaching, teaching things that I wasn't necessarily embodying or didn't fully believe. And that's when I realized I had to walk away from the profession.
And so now your work centers around working with men in a variety of ways. Did you walk away knowing that, or did you give yourself some space? How did you end up with focusing on men's mental health?
Yeah, that Enneagram 8 piece in me is I like to break shit apart and rebuild it. Go big, go home kind of an energy. So I started a cannabis company when I was a rabbi. Okay. I figured, that's a good way to break some shit apart. They weren't real thrilled with it. I was still actively the rabbi, and I started with a couple guys who were congregants, and we built out a pretty substantial cannabis company in the Northeast in Boston. And then I went down the path of entrepreneurism for a little bit, thinking I could run with these guys and be a part of that world. And I realized, I'm out of my lane here. I'm not a business guy. I'm entrepreneurial in spirit, but I'm trained and I'm inclined to just one-on-one work with men to help people in general, and now men in particular, find their meaning, their purpose, their what I call their why. And I decided it was time for me to return back to a middle ground. I couldn't go back to organized religion or religion at all. I also couldn't go down this path of just being a business guy, an entrepreneur, and found this nice space in the middle where I work with the entrepreneurs. I work with the business guys as their therapist, their friend, their coach. Nice. Yeah.
So your book, it's interesting. It's built around this framework of 6 pretty mundane questions that we've all heard a bunch, and you flip it in a way to help men transform with that. So tell us a little bit about the book and what how the questions operate and how they can then generate some reflection for men that create change.
Yeah, the title itself is a famous poem by a man named Dale Wimbrough. Wrote it in 1934. It's called The Guy in the Glass. Okay. And it's about a guy who goes to the mirror and doesn't recognize, certainly doesn't respect the man staring back. And so it's really framed around that because my father just didn't see the man that everybody else saw. And as he was outwardly succeeding in life, it doesn't matter how much you have in the bank, how much outward success you have. If you don't have that guy staring back, and his respect, what do you got at the end of the day? That's essentially the poem. And it's a pretty, kind of heavy start. It's about my father's suicide, but it's also about another father of mine, spiritual father. His name is Viktor Frankl. I know you know of Viktor Frankl. Maybe your audience does or doesn't. Viktor Frankl's famous for his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Probably one of the most important books of the 20th century, according to the Library of Congress. But he started a school of psychotherapy called logotherapy. Logos is meaning, so it's meaning therapy. And I'm a logotherapist. And so I really kind of juxtapose my two fathers, my birth father and my spiritual father, and show the sort of stark contrast between the two. Although they're extremes. Viktor Frankl was in the Holocaust and was born out of that in many ways into the man who he became. And my father was destroyed himself in his own life. So these are extreme bookends, but in the middle is you and I. It's every guy, right? And so I wrote a book for every man with these extreme choices on either side. And I wanted it to take place in a place that every man knows and recognizes, which is a bar. So it's kind of a fictional narrative meets memoir meets a self-development book. And it's about a guy who's just getting asked pickup lines, the ones that you and I, at least I used, I'm sure you did too, in the bar to pick up women or whomever. And so now they're being asked of him, and these sound like simple questions, but they're deep, ancient, mystical, spiritual questions that take us into the heart of who we are, so that we don't end up like my father, and we can't end up like Viktor Frankl. Yeah.
What did you learn about yourself in writing the book?
That I need help writing books. I throw a lot of shit at the wall, and some of it sticks. And, over a 3-year process, I really pivoted a few times. Steve, I wanted to write a book that I could have put in my dad's hands prior to him killing himself. And I think if he would have asked and answered these questions, if he would have gone to the mirror, he would have learned to respect that guy staring back. And so I really was emotionally invested in this book, which is good and bad, right? It's bad because I just think I just got too deep into it and over and over and over. Finally, I got some objective help with it and got clarity, and now it's the book that's in front of you. But I realized, in this process that I am just another, I call him banged up brother walking through life, right? For a long time, we talked about this earlier, but I was, I positioned myself, or I was positioned as the sage on the stage. Rabbi, clergy in general, there's an aura about them, almost like beyond reproach kind of a thing. And I think I did that to hide in plain sight so that I wouldn't have to be seen. And so going through this process of writing the book, I really had to reveal myself. Some of the got taken out just because of the length of the book. But, I was suicidal at one point in my life. I went down a dark path long after he had killed himself. I lost my way. I didn't respect the guy in the glass. And I watched your podcast. I watched a few of them, but one of them on vulnerability. Though I never streaked. Actually, that's not true. Actually, I take that back. I was in a fraternity. We did streak. But being vulnerable and so hard as a man, as a human being, and for me as that Enneagram 8, that tough guy exterior. So to go through this process and to share and to come off of the stage, not to be the sage, just to be a banged up brother walking through it with my men in my life was important but hard.
Yeah, it's interesting when you bring up the vulnerability piece and you talk about the tough guy exterior, and it really is an exterior, right? Because you're actually so afraid to say those things, right? And I think that sometimes men could be helped by looking at it like this is courage. Like vulnerability is courage that benefits you and the people around you, right?
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts on that, and how do you encourage that in people?
Well, watch your podcast, because I watch and listen to the things you're talking about of, the sexual abuse and trauma and this. Yeah, I counsel guys for a living, right? A therapist's office or coach's office and everything in between. And to get them to be vulnerable with me, it's not about me. It's just about them giving voice to these things. To do it then in front of a group like your men's group, my men's group, to do it on camera in front of your millions of viewers. That is just, but that's the definition of courage. Like, it's so hard. It's so much easier to wear the mask, right? To wear the persona, to wear the image, whatever that might be. And to lift it is so hard, but so liberating. I call it my coming out. Right? I happen to be heterosexual, but it's a coming out nonetheless. I've come out, I was on antidepressants for 15 years after my father killed himself. I never once told anybody, because again, the persona of the rabbi, and he has it all together. And the fact that I was suicidal 12 years ago after I left being a rabbi, and I was lost, and I thought I was just worth more dead than alive kind of a thing. I never talked about that stuff. And to be able to come out and say it, it is courageous, I guess, but it's liberating.
Yeah.
And I watch guys who just come out of whatever respective closet they're in, and it's like, oh, and you know what the response is? You've had this experience? Yeah, okay, cool. We have had that too. I've gone through that too. Oh, this guy over here has gone through worse. And you start sharing, and it's like, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. And you realize like it's salvation in many ways.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think when people hear courage and vulnerability, it's like you have to give them what is good about doing that, right? So when you work with men beyond just in the men's group setting and you see them becoming more vulnerable and then you're tracking them as a coach or a therapist or whatever you're doing, how is their life changing and how are the people around them changing? Like how does it impact his wife or his kids or whatever for this process to be happening with a man?
Yeah, I love it. It's so good. I do distinguish between being vulnerable and being weak, right? Because there's a time, there's times when I think I'm being vulnerable, but I'm just being weak. I'm being victim-y, right? They're not the same thing. Like to be vulnerable is to say hard things and to, just speak the truth. And I just think in our society, we've kind of conflated the two. Like, I don't want to be weak.
Right.
It's not the same thing. When I'm pretending to be strong, that's actually weak. When the truth is underneath it, I'm scared. To be able to go to my wife and tell her, I'm scared, spent all this money on this book and to put myself out there and all this stuff. And she's like, oh my God, thank you for opening up. Thank you for, sharing with me. And that's very different than me playing the victim and poor me and kind of weeping and whatever. And I just see that with guys is like, if they start to get some language around this, that being a victim and being vulnerable are not the same thing. And then they start sharing and the relationships start deepening and people start responding to them in a more authentic way. It's just this ripple effect. So I can't say enough important things about being vulnerable, but I also can't say enough strongly enough that it's not the same thing as being weak.
Yeah. And I think for me, what's been really helpful in my life is when I started to try to look at my life through the lens of the hero's journey. So when I'm vulnerable now, it took a little time, but now when I'm doing it, what I'm really kind of telling myself, whether I'm telling you it or not, is these are the really difficult things that I overcame. I know what I went through. I know the things that I did, and I'm relating them, typically at times when I think that they're helpful, not so that I can get sympathy.
Have you gotten negative pushback from sharing what you've shared and putting yourself out there?
A little bit, not really. Because it was in the context of a men's group and it is what we had signed up for. And really what I got the very first time I was ever really vulnerable, which was, it wasn't intentional. I told you I had a very excellent men's group facilitator who's been on this podcast, Ravain Bakal. He asked me a certain set of questions that basically got to this root thing that deep down inside I felt like a bad man. And I'd never really admitted that to myself. And I learned later when I dealt with my sexual abuse that that's what I actually called the guy. Like when it was coming out in therapy, I was like, the bad man's hurting me. The bad man's doing this. I didn't know his name. But when that came out, I just lost it. I couldn't do my thing because I was always a sensitive cat. I could wipe my tear. You wouldn't know I'm crying. I could hide it. And what I got in response that day was like, oh man, finally feeling it from you. I got so much positive reinforcement. And so now, and then what I did was expand that circle of safe people to do it. And now, of course, I wouldn't say I've gotten negative consequences. I've gotten clearly times when people are not comfortable with what I'm saying. And I'll just shift the conversation up. Typically I'm mostly when it's about those historical things, because I've tackled them a little bit, I'm mostly doing it for them, right? But I also know that, there's a limited amount of time on this planet. And if I can't talk to you about real stuff, then I don't want to spend much of that time with you.
It's good. It's a good vetting process.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, no, there's a difference between, I think I heard you talk about Brene Brown. I think she calls it floodlighting. Right, which is just flooding somebody with too much that isn't yet earned or warranted.
Yes.
Right? That's very different than being vulnerable. Right? That's almost, that's my Enneagram 8 tactic to, to go on the offense, to overwhelm you with shock and awe kind of thing as a way to not be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of counterintuitive. And so it's a fine line. But I think it's really important for us to kind of hash out this difference between vulnerability and these other ways of being in the world that's not vulnerable.
Exactly.
But the other thing is coming back to the question is, I haven't met too many guys who've had negative feedback from being vulnerable. Again, maybe it's a vetting process. One of my guys who's one of my men's peer groups said that he was with some high school or college buddies, and he said, "Yeah, let's do a little peer group here. Let's have a meaningful conversation." They're like, "Can you just give it a rest? Like, can we just drink?"
Right.
And then, but that's what you're kind of talking about. It was a vetting process, and he's like, he didn't fire those friends, but he doesn't really get together with them anymore because time is precious.
Yeah, that's an experience, and you really, especially when you've used the substances or all the defense mechanisms to not be vulnerable your entire life, and then you start to get the positives. And I've gotten a ton of especially from women and my children and all of it. Then that becomes the thing that you crave.
Yeah.
Not the drink, but like, I want to go out with you and have a cup of coffee and talk about something real.
Yeah, and that's the guy in the glass. As far as as far as I see it, is like when you go to the mirror,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do you recognize that guy? Am I being true to that guy? And you get to a point where it's like, with me as a rabbi, or with you in the conversations around vulnerability, it's like, I can't pretend anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Life is too short. I'm not going to go through the motions. And if it makes them uncomfortable, that's probably a them problem, not a me problem. And, maybe I have to realign myself with people who can receive what I'm offering,
Mm-hmm.
but don't want to put on the mask anymore.
Right.
And I think that's partially the liberation of the second half of life too. Like, I'm a huge fan of the second half of life.
Yeah.
I think it's so underrated. I think the first half is so overrated. And I think part of it for me is I get to take the masks off and say, I don't know if I can swear on your podcast, but fuck you if you don't like it.
Right.
I would rather be alone than to be, masked version of me and be liked.
Absolutely. So you mentioned Viktor Frankl, and I remember reading Man's Search for Meaning just post college, and of course, I mean, it's a brilliant book. It really lands on you. It was inspirational for me. I don't know that I applied it really in any way. It was like an experience that I had that I thought was cool, and I'm sure many of your clients have probably already read the book. But how when somebody comes in, do you get them from just seeing that as an experience to something that impacts their lives and really stays with them?
Yeah. One of the reasons why I've shifted from therapy to coaching is because I'm, again, this phrase that just keeps coming to me, the sage on the stage. Therapy has its place, don't get me wrong. But for most of the guys that I know, they don't need therapy. They just need a brother to sit with them, talk with them, give them a different perspective, right? Give them a little bit of their life wisdom and listen. And I think partially that comes down to, at least me, I respect people who walk their talk. And so many therapists I know are fucked up, just like so many preachers and rabbis are fucked up and, do as I say, not as I do kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about Viktor Frankl that I've always loved, I love positive psychology too. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing thing. It was born in the late 20th century at Harvard University, right? And it's a great new way to think about psychology, except it was created in the corner office by somebody who has, emeritus status on a university. Logotherapy was born out of the fucking Holocaust.
Right.
This is a man whose wife was murdered. His kid was murdered. His parents were murdered. His brother, his family, his friends, they took away his profession, his possessions. They reduced him to a number, right? I wear his number right here on my arm, 119104. And this man said, everything has been taken from me but the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose your own way. And if he says that out of the Holocaust, having lost everything I just said, and he didn't lose his way, and you have my father over here who had every outward comfort and lost his way and threw it away, killed himself, I respect this man immensely. And I want to learn from him. So when I approach it from that perspective, I haven't met anybody who goes, no, I'm not interested.
Right.
Right? Like, fuck yeah, let's go.
Yeah. And the part about the choice, it's really, as somebody who had, the experiences I had in the nervous system that I had, I just had a lot of behaviors that, felt automatic. I didn't have choice. And I remember being in therapy sessions, couples therapy with very reasonable requests of me. And I'm a reasonable guy when I'm not triggered. I was like, yes. I mean, that's a yes. I want to be able to listen to you in this way and let you finish and not get defensive and not blow up and all that. But I didn't think that my nervous system could really allow me to do that, right? And I'm wondering, when you work with men, you might have this experience. I mean, I generally think, at least the filter that I have, is when that's happening, it's you're in a dysregulated nervous system state. So you can't handle the conversation, you need a drink, whatever. And so the approach that I had for me personally was calm my nervous system down and then start to work on all the other things. And so when you're working with men and coaching with them, how do you go with the kind of theories of logotherapy first if you see somebody like me, or how do those things play together when you work with men?
Yeah. I just realized I did a wardrobe change while you were talking, and now we look like we're twins. All right. I got the memo. You're a good dresser, man. Logotherapy is built on this one simple idea that you always have a choice, right? I mean, people will say, okay, well, what did a rape victim or the other, the children of the Holocaust, whatever it might be, right? What choice did they have? But as Frankl said, even in the gas chamber, people had the choice to say the Lord's Prayer or the Shema in Judaism as the Zyklon B was coming out of the shower heads that weren't shower heads, and they had that choice. Like, that was theirs. How do you respond to the moment? It doesn't mean you can change the circumstance. It certainly doesn't mean you can rewrite the past. What happened to you happened to you. What happens in this very moment is your choice. So if we're in a coaching session and you're dysregulated and you're in understandably a victim mode that we all go into, right? But you still have a choice, and that is, let's just take a breath. That's all that you have a choice over. It's the first thing we give away is our breath. Kid skins their knee, and the first thing to go, their breath, which is why as a parent, you picked your kid up and you said, it's okay, shh, take a deep breath, right? We're just grown children. And when I'm sitting with a man who's been victimized by 1,000 different things life has to offer, I would never tell him, it's not true, you're weak, right? What? Let's get back into your power. And the one thing you have control over right now, Steve, is your breath, which is what Ruvain said to me, ultimately. Yep. And it's so obvious, but it's not so easy when you're triggered, because our attention goes out in 1,000 different ways. Save me something outside of me. And what Frankl's philosophy is, start with your power, and your power is choose to breathe. And we build from there. Okay. And so how can you argue with that? Because now you're back online. And now, there's another amazing teacher who was a student of Frankl's, but she was also a Holocaust survivor. And her name was Edith Eger. And she wrote 2 books. One's called The Gift and one's called The Choice. They're well-known books that are really worth reading. And she has the simple definition of a victim versus a survivor. And again, coming out of the Holocaust, she says a victim says, why me? And we all do that. We're all victimized by life, and we all go through the why me period. I certainly did, right? But the problem with why me is can't answer it. It's unanswerable. It's a black hole, and it just takes us down into powerlessness. A survivor says, what now? It happened. I can't tell you why it happened. I can't tell you why my father killed himself, but what do I do with it? That's actionable. Gives me power back. What now? Well, what now is I can survive, right? And that's the work of Frankl. I'd like to think that's the work I've done in my own life and helping other men is take back your power. Stop focusing on the why me. We all do it, but it gets you where my father ended up.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, honestly, the root of the why me question is one that's pretty unexamined. If you look at human history, why me? Well, because it happens to all of us.
That's why. Because you're a human being.
Yeah, it's the nature of of reality. And I think a part of that hero's journey and looking at yourself as a spiritual being, which is definitely something that's come on for me more as my nervous system has come down, is the why me's that is the gifts that I've been given to come here and learn and actually move through. Very difficult at the time, and maybe easier in hindsight to kind of look at and talk about.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a fundamental mischaracterization of reality,
Yeah.
and especially in this culture when, all these books about happy all the time, that is an absurd concept. No one would want to be happy all the time. One,
Yeah.
you wouldn't know you're happy.
Yeah.
And it's not the measure of life. So to kind of have a little more perspective and zoom out a little bit.
Yeah, and Eager continues on by saying, "Why not me?" Right?
Right.
Maybe I was chosen for this. I don't ever tell people to come to that conclusion. You must come there on your own. But I believe I was chosen to be in between my children. I have 4 children, and my father and his mother and her father, to be the one that heals the broken chain. It ends with me. I said this at my father's funeral 20 years ago. It fucking stops here. There will not be a suicide number 3. By the way, that is my life purpose, is not to kill myself. Now that's the baseline. I'd like to think I stand for more than that. I do stand for more than that, but that's my why not me? And if I can just do that, I know statistically I've changed the trajectory of my kids, because if your parent kills themselves, you're infinitely more likely to kill yourself. Yeah. And it just keeps going up exponentially. Well, thank you. Thank you, God, for putting me in the game at this moment in time. Why not me? I've had to bear it, endure it, learn from it, and I'm honored to bear the burden, right? And that's the game change.
Well, it says a lot about you and what you care about and what you value. So I really appreciate that concept. And I also think it's an inspiration for men. Sometimes this work, and I don't really consider it work, it's been the joy of my life. It can feel like it's hard and kind of self-centered. And I had a experience, I'll never forget it. I was just on a bike ride here in Boulder, and I'd been deep in this stuff. And a friend of mine that I'd known my entire life, just called me up and he left a voicemail. He's like, "I'm just so proud of you to see how you've healed your lineage." And I grew up in a very violent home and with a lot of negative inputs from men overall, inside my house and outside my house. And I will just never forget that. And, now I think of it as, what an inspirational approach to go inward. A lot of this seems inward, right? I'm dealing with this, I'm working on my stuff and all that. But it's not. That's what I've really learned, is the experience of dealing with this affects every system. And it greatly affects your kids and your wife. And so it's something for men, like, contemplating this and knowing this will be hard. If you have heavy stuff go on, like you and I have, then it's not always going to be easy, but you can heal your lineage. And I mean, what an amazing thing. And to think about that even though the experiences that your father had and how negative they were on you, you're looking at it like you're a lineage, right? Like it's a long line of your people, and maybe his weaker action or giving in was the spur for that lineage to be healed.
Love it. Yes. I'm a teacher of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, and the premise of Kabbalah is, and Viktor Frankl draws a lot of his insights from it, although he doesn't always name it, and that is that our mission as human beings is to go into the darkness and discover the sparks of light. There's always sparks of light, divinity, whatever you want to call it. And, I have another book prior to this one. It's called Spark Seekers. And that's what we need to become, spark seekers. When it's dark, our duty is to face it, to go into the void, right? A teacher of mine calls it avoidance, a void dance, a dance around the void, Enneagram 7 101, dance around the void, keep dancing. Or you can say, I'm done. Frankl calls it, I'll make my defiant stand, and I will go in there and I will not come out until I make it yield light, whether it's sexual trauma or tragedy of other sorts, whatever it might be. That's why I'm here. to transform, Frankl says, tragedy into triumph. And to sit across from a man who has faced the darkness, gone into the darkness, mined it for meaning, found it, carried the light out so that you can illuminate other people's darkness as you're doing, it's fucking heroic. It's the hero's journey. Like, it's truly remarkable. And I think it's why we're here. It isn't happy or fun, but it's meaningful.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, I think it's we have similar sort of similar-ish experiences and path, and I think you with all the men that you've worked with and I've talked to, almost universally, when they've gotten to a certain place, they look at the negative, quote unquote, negative experiences they had as blessings.
So true. We've been duped by the pursuit of happiness. It's a ridiculous pursuit. I mean, you can see it. This is the chase for the next thing, the shinier object, the newer house, and I think the real joy of second half of life is you start to see through the bullshit and you start to see the adversity. I call them life's T's, transitions, tests, trials, traumas, tragedies, as the invitation. I don't want it, but here's the deal. It's going to happen. Right? Everybody listening to this has a death sentence. Ain't none of us getting out of this alive. So the question is it an invitation or do we void dance? Keep dancing. And when you start to reframe your worldview, you don't go looking for it. That's just masochism, right? Frankl would say there's no meaning in purposefully choosing suffering. But again, the truth about life is you don't have to go looking for it. It'll find you. When it comes, right? How do you view it? Is it an invitation or is it something to outrun, to avoid?
And so you run men's groups, and my experience is that was the first step in this process of change. And I think oftentimes for men, they're seeking. And when you talk to somebody who is interested in it, what do you say is, here are the benefits of being in a men's group?
Yeah, as much as I like coaching, counseling, I'm starting to call it mentoring. It has its limits as a man, and I think it's way safer to seek out a one-on-one guide than it is for a man to put himself into a communal context and do this work. It has its place, and I think it's a starting point. But I want my guys to graduate into a group because it's the antithesis of everything, at least I was taught, and I've heard you talk about it too. You grew up, and I grew up in the same time. I think we're roughly the same age where, sharing this stuff, you were heard it on your podcast, a pussy. Yep. Right? Yeah. You don't share. I remember breaking down into tears after my grandmother killed herself, and I just remember not being received by my buddies, right? It was high school. Like, I was like, shut the fuck up, and you're a buzzkill, some version of that. And so we've been traumatized as men, right? I've only learned how to relate to men up to a certain point in my life through the locker room and the boardroom and that kind of posturing and the mask and the invulnerability, not vulnerability. So it's one thing for a guy to be able to do this with me one-on-one, and that's a beautiful starting point. But until you can put yourself into a context with other men and be held literally or figuratively in that space, to be vulnerable, to share this aspects of who we are, I would say the journey is not yet complete. And it is the most transformative experience I can say as a man, to experience love from other men, non-sexual love from another man. It's life-changing.
Yeah, it's interesting. What comes to mind is, I'm in the psychedelic space, and there's been a lot of research with veterans, and they often talk about the brotherhood and how that's helped them to get through things. And the men's group, for someone who hasn't been in a war, it's kind of like my brotherhood. Like we've been through things together. We've seen each other up and down and at the quote unquote worst. And they are now my strongest people. They are my community in a way that friends that I've known for 40 some years are not, just because they don't know that. And so I think there's a way to create a brotherhood, which is a real need, right? The epidemic of loneliness in the country for men. it would be inconceivable for me to think that you would actively engage in a men's group for a year and come out of it not feeling like you had some brothers.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So my podcast, which we're going to get you onto, is called the 13 Minutes. It's not 13 minutes long, which is a lot of people think. Then I trap them, and then they're like, 45 minutes. You said 13 minutes. It's actually the tragic statistic that every 13 minutes in America, a man kills himself. Mm-hmm. And the second part of my podcast is why every man needs a why. And you have to have a purpose. You have to have a why. But you also have to have other community, brotherhood, friendship, something. Because I don't have data on this, but I'm positive that the common through line for all suicides is loneliness, right? And so the antidote to loneliness is community, however you define that. And we live in a world that has lopped off community. We don't have tribes. We don't have organizations. Most of us don't have religious institutions anymore. We're wandering alone through the wilderness. And as a man, it's way too easy to, the lone wolf, the go it alone, this bullshit stereotype. You can't do anything alone. You can't have a piece of toast alone. 1,000 people are involved in every single but we've been duped to think, I'm going to go it alone. I'm going to bootstrap it. Bullshit. That's why we have a suicide epidemic. And by the way, suicide comes in lots of forms. Some of it is acute and explicit, like my father, but I've worked with guys who are killing themselves, and they're just taking the long, painful route. Right? We have an epidemic, and loneliness is countered by community, and men don't readily find community. Women do. Women are wired for community. Men are wired to hunt alone. And so we got to defy that. And that's why this is so important.
It's interesting because I was talking with someone else on my podcast, and he brought up this point of that culturally America is specifically susceptible to this because, because I'd always thought of, one of the reasons why I think we're such an economic powerhouse is we are the people in every country that said, my life isn't great here. I'm going to take a big risk. I'm going to move to a place I don't know to support, my family. And all four of my grandparents did. And all four of them were very poor and that thing. And I was like, what an entrepreneurial kind of community of people we have here. And our world dominates, our country dominates economically. But the other part of that is we are also the people who decided to leave our communities. And even that, for a better thing. And my experience of being in other places, my son took a year off or an online school year, and we were in Portugal for a few months. And seeing the people there and talking to the expats, and over what I heard from the Americans that had moved there is, I lived in my neighborhood for 12 years. I didn't know one person in them. I live here and I know everybody. And they value that kind of community. So here we are, we live here, and I think we need to take a little extra effort to develop that community, knowing what we're kind of up against, even in our genetics, maybe.
So true. I'm both American and Israeli. Israel's consistently ranked as one of the top 10 happiest societies on earth. It just came out last week. It's number 8, I think it is. And now that's not what you would assume watching the news, right? You would assume it's war-torn, which it's not. You'd assume it's stressed out, which maybe it is, it isn't, but they're happy. And one of the reasons why is because it is a community of 2 degrees of separation. Everybody knows everybody, for better and worse. But the bottom line is they don't have a loneliness epidemic. There's almost no suicide in the veteran population in Israel. You can agree or disagree, this isn't political, but they know what they're fighting for. There's never been a war fought in Israel where somebody in the platoon hasn't seen their home. You can see your home. You know what you're fighting for. You come over to America, you think you have a suicide epidemic in the general population? Look at the military population. Veterans is far higher than every 13 minutes proportionally. And so we have a loneliness epidemic. We have a community crisis going on here, as you're describing. And partially it's what makes America so great, the entrepreneurial, bootstrap it, go it alone mentality, the cowboy, all that kind of stuff. And partially it's killing us. And we got to do the work of extracting best practice from other places or other societies or other times and not losing what makes us great. Like I'm not one of these people who bashes on America. It's the greatest country in the history of humanity, as far as I'm concerned. But it's not without problems. And a teacher of mine, Dennis Prager, says, compared to every country in the world, America comes out shining. Compared to utopia, America sucks. Right? So like, I really want us to do work as Americans, especially here, and as men, to keep doing what works, the entrepreneurial spirit, and also like, let's let go of what doesn't work anymore. And we need community, we need tribes, we need men's groups.
So as we kind of wrap up here, if you want to talk to the man, I believe, however many viewers we have, there's one who is meant to see this thing. And you work with a lot of men, and you've turned your life experiences into something really admirable. What do you say to somebody who's got that, what I would call functional but free? On the outside, their life looks like they have all the things, but inside there's just this gnawing emptiness that something is not right.
So I tend to turn to sages who came before me. It's kind of, I'm wired, and the tradition I come from, and I can draw more wisdom from them than I can offer of my own. I would offer the poem by Dale Wimbrough. It was written in 1934. My grandfather gave it to me. He actually carried this in his wallet. He was a major in the United States military during World War II. So he carried this poem, and he gave it to me at some point. I didn't pay attention to it, but I paid attention to it because it was stuck to his wall of his nursing home when he died. And so this was a poem that was written by Dale Wimbrough in 1934 to a young man who had inquired in a newspaper back in the day when we had newspapers and people would write in, and he had a question about some type of material professional struggle that he felt like his conscience was on the line. And so this was put out to the population to respond back to this young man's inquiry about how do you handle ethical dilemma in business. And Dale Wimbrough's poem was chosen as the finalist, and so it's the response to this young man. It goes like this. And the word hinges around pelf. It's not a mispronunciation. It means ill-gotten gains. When you get what you want in your struggle for pelf, and the world makes you king for a day, then go to the mirror and look at yourself and see what that guy has to say. For it isn't your father or mother or wife whose judgment upon you must pass. The fellow whose verdict counts most in your life is the guy staring back from the glass. He's the fellow to please, never mind all the rest, for he's with you clear up to the end. And you've passed your most dangerous, difficult test if the guy in the glass is your friend. You may be like Jack Horner and chisel a plum and think you're a wonderful guy, but the guy in the glass says you're only a bum if you can't look him straight in the eye. You can fool the whole world down the pathway of years and get pats on the back as you pass, but your final reward will be heartache and tears if you've cheated the guy in the glass. Dale Wimbrough, 1934.
And the title of your book.
Buy now, and I'll throw in my other two books that didn't sell. But I turned to that because that's my father's story. He had everything exterior and outwardly, and he had nothing, obviously, at the end, inwardly, and he killed himself. And Viktor Frankl had nothing outwardly, but he made a lasting contribution to society because he had everything inwardly. That's the message. Whatever you're doing, make sure you don't cheat the guy in the glass. That's it.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. They can find the book on Amazon. Where else can people find you if they want to work with you or are interested in what you do?
Just go to Halevi, BHALEVI.com. You'll get everything I have to offer and more.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on. Appreciate you.
Thanks, brother.
All right.
Thank you so much for being here with me. And let's keep going on this journey together. If you know someone who needs this, share it with them. I'm here every Wednesday, and I hope to see you too.